Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another Live at 5. I am your host, Curator Kevin Adkisson with the Cranbrook Center for Collections and Research. And yesterday on Live at 5 on Instagram, I did the Samuel Yellen Gates out by the parking lot in 23-degree weather with snow and ice. So today I vowed to be indoors, and now it's 43 degrees and beautiful sunshine. But here we are in the beautiful Cranbrook House Library. And I thought that today, I know we've been at Cranbrook House many times, but I thought I would share with you the details of the story of the fireplace Overmantel. Now, it's one of the most popular aspects of any Cranbrook House tour, and it's a place where, under normal circumstances, when the Center for Collections is doing campus tours, I love to be able to welcome guests here to Cranbrook, starting with this fireplace, because I think, as we will learn in the next 20 or so minutes, you can really tell the entire story of Cranbrook through this one carving. And the subjects of the hour are actually carved onto this piece. And so I'm going to talk about the Overmantel from top to bottom. But to get started, let's go ahead and place ourselves in the house. So the Cranbrook House Library is an addition to the original house. It was completed in 1918. Planning for it began around 1916, 1917. The original house from 1908 is this, we can see it here, the original Albert Kahn design, which is in the style of the English arts and crafts. And so you see elements of Tudor architecture and Elizabethan architecture, really a very English-style home. That in the original rooms of the house, it is more modest, it is lower ceilings, more wood paneling, much darker, really all about handcrafted materials and a sort of English country seat. By 1918, the big change in the life of the Booths was that George Booth was rising in the ranks of Detroit society. The family was growing and expanding with grandchildren, and they really needed a room not only for books, but also for their sort of social functions. And so their youngest daughter would have her wedding here. They would have debutante balls and special events. And so this room was as much a sort of books for looks as it was books for reading, and it really added on this enormous space for special events. But George Booth was no less passionate about the arts and crafts in 1917-18 than he had been in 1908 when he was working on the original house. And so everything in this room he wanted to be custom for the house, and he wanted it to be relevant, to teach a story to those visitors who would come through Cranbrook House. And so he engaged in a lot of craftsmen. A couple of weeks ago, I talked about the Edward F. Caldwell Company that did all of the light fixtures. In a future Live at 5, I imagine that we will come and talk some about the Herder Brothers tapestry, the last great crusade. But there was one craftsman that George Booth had known since the 1890s and who had done work for George Booth on a smaller scale, and this was his I think their greatest collaboration, and that was Johannes Kirchmeyer. And Kirchmayer was a German-born artisan from Oberrammergau in Bavaria. And if you know the name of that town, it's famous for two things. One, being home to the best of German wood carving. And so Johann Kirchmeyer, who in America went by John Kirchmeyer, he was descended from a long line of wood carvers. He learned the trade from his grandfather and from his uncle George. And then the other great tradition of Obergammergau, I'm not going to say it again, is the passion play that they put on every decade. Of course, it's been interrupted twice, once by World War II and once by COVID-19, but it's been going on for like 400 years. And so a young Kirchmayer, he actually acted as Joseph, of Joseph in the Technicolor Dreamcoat. And I think that we can trace his sort of career of carving ecclesiastical sculptures to this real dedication to the traditions of his small town in Bavaria. Now, he started his carving career, again with his family training, but then he went on and he did all of the carving in this room, though some of it is by his assistants. And you can tell because it is not quite as grand what the master did versus what the assistants did. And so he trains not only in Bavaria, but then he goes to school in Augsburg, Germany, and then in Munich, and then in London and in Paris. And in Augsburg, he actually studied anatomy and life drawing, and he got a more sort of traditional fine art education. And so as I transition around the room, these are from the studio of Kirchmayer. He actually worked, the firm is called Irving and Kaysen. This is the master's handiwork. And so we do divide everything sort of by the workshop of Kirchmayer versus Kirchmayer's own hand. And so here we see there are 4 of these figures in each corner of the room. He was working in Germany and in Europe until 1880 when he immigrated to Boston, seeking, like so many immigrants before him, more opportunities and a new life in the new world. So he was just 20 years old when he came to Boston. And one of his early contacts in Boston was none other than the late great Stanford White of McKim, and White fame. And so, Stanford White's designs, they range from the old Penn Station to buildings in Washington to grand mansions. He was really the sort of foremost leader of the Beaux-Arts style. Think of Columbia University or the NYU campus in the Bronx. And so Stanford White really relied on this young German immigrant, Kirchmayer, to do the wood carving in all of Stanford White's colonial revival and shingle style and the neoclassical and Beaux-Arts buildings. A real change came in the career of Johann Kirchmayer when, in 1897, he was one of the founders of the Boston Society of Arts and Crafts. So in Germany, the arts and crafts movement was led by the Deutsche Werkbund, which Eliel Saarinen was a member of. In England, the arts and crafts were really established and developed by William Morris and Company. And the Boston Society of Arts and Crafts was the very first arts and crafts societies in America. Now, the arts and crafts, I talked about it a lot, so just briefly again, the arts and crafts are advocating for truth, beauty, and utility in every item in your home and in the world. They're against industrial production, they're against sort of machine-made architectural designs, and they think that if everything in your home is exquisitely crafted and exquisitely beautiful, your home and therefore your life will be exquisitely beautiful. Who else was a founding member of the Boston Society of Arts and Crafts back in 1897? A young, strapping George G. Booth, and he joined as a member as a metalsmith. Kirchmayer joined as a wood carver, and so they would have met in Boston in the 1890s. Now, in 1898, Kirchmayer joined the firm of Irving and Kaysen, leading the wood carving division, and he would stay with that firm until his death in Cambridge, Massachusetts in 1930. He was considered to be the foremost architectural wood carver in America, even going so far as shortly before his life, earning the only American Institute of Architects Craftsmanship Medal for Distinguished Achievement in Wood Carving. So the only AIA medal for wood carving ever awarded went to Mr. Kirchmayer. And while he was working, he became associated most closely with Ralph Adams Cram, who did the Grand Episcopal Cathedral in downtown Detroit and many other churches across the country, and also built Princeton. Ralph Adams Cram was really the leading light of the American Gothic and the American Collegiate Gothic movement, and much of that wood carving was done by Kirchmayer. So, with that introduction of the biography of our hero of today's Live at 5, let's do a run-through of what is happening here on the Overmantel. And it is getting a little bit dim, but I can cut on the light. And we'll start at the very top. So there is a plaster border that starts at the ceiling and then runs into this oak leaf border that runs around the entire room. And then right at the center is 1918, the year that this room was carved. On the left of 1918 is a silhouette portrait of Mrs. Booth, Ellen Scripps Booth, and then both of her parents, James Scripps Booth and her mother, and then the Scripps family crest. And the Scripps were wealthy English people, and so they actually had a family crest, and so that is the Scripps shield there. On the other side, we get to George Booth and his parents, Henry Wood Booth and Clara Granger Booth. And then the Booth family crest, which they were poor craftsmen in jolly old Cranbrook, England. And so this crest was invented by George Booth, and it shows 3 Bs representing 3 generations of Booths, or bees, in North America. And the Booths loved bees because the Booths believed bees to be architects, to be builders. They made their beehives. They made more than they needed, and they were sort of integral to the flourishing of all life. And so that is what Booth thought a good American citizen should be. They should be sort of creating and benefiting all of the other elements of life and giving back to the community, because we're all sort of bees within the hive of the world. Now, the next line after the portraits, we see, it's a little bit hard to read, but we see one line of an 1711 epitaph from Walter Savage Landor, who was an English poet. And his epitaph poem is just 3 lines long. We have one of those lines here, and it was the epitaph he wrote for himself. And it reads, "Nature I loved, and next to nature, art," which I think embodies the sort of entire Cranbrook ideal in just one line. Of course, the campus is this created natural world, but it is a place where nature and art and architecture are all unified into one cohesive whole. And so that poem, that one line of the poem, is carved before any of the Cranbrook institutions had been established. Brookside would be established the same year that this was completed, but it works even up to sort of 1942 with the opening of the art museum. You still have nature I loved and next to nature art working as this sort of symbolic leading thought of all of Cranbrook. And then there are the people in the Overmantel. And I think if you just came to a party here in Cranbrook House, you might think, okay, well, there's some medieval people walking around, but you really have to study it to figure out what is going on. It's divided into 3 sections by this tree border. And so you see the way that Kirchmayer has carved to create this sort of triptych form, which is, of course, a very prominent typology in ecclesiastical art, which was Kirchmayer's specialty. And so he's taking this ecclesiastical form of the triptych, but he's forming it by these trees. And so you see how this is a great oak, or I assume it's an oak because it's carved in oak. And then the tree reaches the top and you see the flowers and the leaves. And you can just see that there's actually really sort of beautiful depth to the entire carving. So you can see how the tree is actually outboard of the entire overmantel. And then behind the trees, you have Gothic tracery. So it is this interesting creation where, are they standing in a wood? Are they standing among trees? Or are they standing in the cathedral? And of course, in the sort of great readings of the Gothic cathedral from an architectural standpoint, think about the columns of a cathedral and how they are almost like bundles of stone. And so you think of those as almost being the trees that are supporting the cathedral. And one of the things that Kirchmayer does as he develops his own language of design and wood carving is really play with this idea of materiality and representation. And so is he depicting the masonry of the cathedral? Is he depicting the tree of the forest? Is he depicting some sort of almost transfiguration of materiality from the raw earth into the sort of man-made created architecture, all of which is sort of imbued with the spirituality of the circumstance? And so here, spirituality is a huge part of the piece. The formal title of this work is Personification of the Arts, Religion Inspiring the Arts. And so right at the center of the piece is an Episcopal bishop. And so we see that the bishop is clad in his robes. And do you see how there are colored elements to the overmantel? The flashlight is really helping us see that. It's much more prominent on your screen than it is even in person. And that actually reflects the way that Kirchmayer would work. So he never did sketches of his carvings. Instead, he would start with the block. And so here you can see these cracks in the piece. So those are the way that the piece has actually cracked over time. But he's using a series of enormously wide oak boards. He would start with the piece he was carving, so not with sort of sketches on paper, or he would not do sort of smaller maquettes. And he would use black charcoal to sketch everyone out as a nude so that he would get their anatomy correct and he would get the proportions of arms and legs and musculature and faces right, because remember, he took these anatomy classes. Then he would use colored pastels, and he would do all of the drapery. And so the colored in-painting on the final piece is, I think, reflecting that duality of how he would actually sketch on the wood, with the black charcoal creating the nude figure, and then the colored pastels coming in for the drapery. Here at the end, after he's carved away all those initial sketches, he comes back in and he re-highlights some of the drapery with color. But what is the very foot of the bishop? We see slacks and leather oxfords. And so here at the sort of medievalizing gathering of the artisans, we see that in fact it is a modern sort of 19-teens person who is wearing his robes. And so it is this little sort of telltale sign that we are in 1918, we are not in 1318. Now, the Episcopal bishop's role here is anointing the mother of the arts, which is architecture. And so a belief that George Booth held, and that was very prominent within the arts and crafts movement, is that architecture is the mother arts and all of the other arts are subservient to the creation of architecture. So it is the sort of high point in the layering of the arts. Now, the architect, we know he's an architect because he has a blueprint in his hand. There's no building card, but it's clearly a rolled drawing, and he's pointing, sort of explaining his building. And then the other telltale iconography that he's an architect is this Corinthian column, which is in the order of columns from Doric, Ionic to Corinthian, and then composite. This is the most elaborate, is the high point of Greek architecture adapted by the Romans. And so we know it's Corinthian because of the fluted acanthus leaf coming out here and then going to the curved volute. And so those are the two signs of the architect, the Corinthian column and the blueprint. Now, the architect himself is a portrait of the house's architect, the architect of Detroit, Albert Kahn. Of course, Kahn came from a very large Jewish family, the son of a rabbi, and so I'll let you draw your own meaning about Albert Kahn being anointed by the Episcopal bishop here. Now, Albert Kahn is then surrounded by the other artisans. He's actually getting sort of Episcopalians from both sides because he also has a nun behind his shoulder here. But then, in the Bavarian tradition of wood carving, the artist always carves a likeness of himself within the piece. And so following that Bavarian tradition, we see here a portrait of the woodcarver Johann Kirchmeyer. And so Kirchmayer is not wearing a formal religious robe, he is wearing a workman's robe. And if you go online and just Google image Kirchmayer, this is how he looked when he worked. So he wore his sort of I don't know if it was cotton or muslin robe, but it's this plain, simple white robe. And then he would wear his leather bag, which had all of his carving tools. And so you're seeing the mallet there alongside the different chisels that he uses for carving wood. And he's actually holding the figure of an angel, which is over at Cranbrook Art Museum. So Kirchmayer carved this overmantel. He also carved this angel, and then the angel was purchased or given to George Booth as part of the collection. And then he's always depicting himself with this sort of Einstein-like crazy hair and his signature mustache. Now, behind the wood carver, they're arranged not so much in any further order, though I do think that the sort of prime movers and shakers are here in the center panel. And so on the other side of the nun, we have the silversmith, Arthur J. Stone, who was an English metalsmith working in Sheffield and then in Edinburgh. And Mr. Booth had an Arthur Stone tea set here at Cranbrook House. And so this is a portrait of Arthur Stone holding a great silver platter, our silver ecclesiastical plate, because we see the crucifix on it. Next to Arthur Stone would have been Mr. Booth's sort of kindred spirit, and this is Frank Koralewsky, a Polish-American iron worker. And so you see the silversmith and then the blacksmith, and he is actively working on the anvil, and so he has his tools there in the anvil. And then he also has his, I forget the name of this tool, but the piece that you use to actually anneal or to heat the metal as you're working. So these are his tongs, which have a special name that he's using to put the metal piece in and out of the furnace. Now, we do have pieces by Arthur Stone here at Cranbrook House and at the Art Museum, but a little bit more convenient is a work by Mr. Koralewsky, and these are the wonderful andirons and poker for the fireplace. And so this is an example right below the overmantel where the artist is represented in wood up above, and then his handicraft is represented immediately below. And all of the beautiful ironwork and the little gilded elements of gold there. I'm not sure what the silver metal there is. I imagine that the gold metal is a bronze alloy in order for it to actually withstand the heat. It could not be gold leaf. That would have come off with the fire. Now, behind Frank, we have the glazier, the stained glass artist, and this is the last of the identified artists. And this is Nicola De Santizo, who was born in Italy, and he was both a stained glass maker, also a muralist, and a painter. He was born in Italy. He worked in the Philadelphia area. And so he immigrated in the 1880s, shortly after Kirchmayer did. And I was trying to figure out with my colleague Leslie Mayo today exactly how Nicola ended up on the overmantel, because there isn't a piece in the Cranbrook collection by Nicola that dates to 1917-18 when this piece would have been carved. And so it's a little unclear to me, and I'm sure that there's a reason that a little bit more time in the archives I could put it together. The best connection that Leslie and I were able to discover, or Leslie discovered it, was in 1917. Samuel Yellin and Nicola had both been involved in a show in Philadelphia called the Americanization Through the Arts Show. And George Booth likely would have seen that show. George Booth was working with Samuel Yellin in that exact moment, designing the new gates into the Cranbrook estate. And so it's possible that George Booth would have known Nicola's work through the Philadelphia art scene. Also, Nicola was working in Philadelphia from 1904 until 1954 and would complete some 7,800 windows in American churches. So though I'm not that familiar with his work, and most of the stained glass in this house is from the studio of G. Owen Bonawit, who was a New York stained glass artist. Perhaps George Booth includes Nicola here because he admired him as America's leading light of stained glass artistry. Now, if the name is familiar to you, you probably go to Christchurch, Cranbrook, because Nicola was the artist of the east window, which is the Life of Christ window. So the window that you see when you walk into Christchurch at the end of the nave behind Johannes Kirchmeyer's great altarpiece is Nicola's stained glass. But that's 10 years later after this was carved. So we do have examples of his work on the Cranbrook property, just not here in the house and not as early as he is depicted here. So I wonder what he would have thought getting this fabulous commission for Christchurch, Cranbrook, knowing that George Booth was already living for a decade with his portrait in his library. Now, the next person, we come to our first woman artist, and this is a bookbinder. You may be familiar with George Booth and the Cranbrook Press. It operated from 1900 to 1902. It was the very first thing that George Booth used the word Cranbrook for. Cranbrook was the name of the small town south of London where the Booths were from. And so George Booth had already sort of expressed his interest in fine bookmaking and bookbinding. And when the Cranbrook Arts and Crafts Studios opened in 1929 as the precursor to Cranbrook Academy of Art, a bookbindery led by Jean Eschman was one of the original studios. And so George Booth really admired the art of bookbinding. Next to the bookbinder is the painter, who is seen with the artist palette and brush. So he has brushes in his left hand with the palette, and then he's holding a brush in his right hand, looking very thoughtful, thinking about his work. He's also standing next to this architectural figure, and so I think he's representing both painting on canvas, but also architectural painting or mural painting. And then the last figure, which I think it's interesting, he gets pushed all the way to the corner, is the mason or the sculptor. And so he's holding in his hand the little compass-like tool in order to scribe a stone block, in order to carve a block for like a block wall. And then he also has in this decorative leather pouch the chisels and the tools for a sculptor to be carving fine art. Now, I forgot to point out on the stained glass window here, what are the two crests that we see? We see the Scripps family crest on the left and the Booth family crest on the right. Now, on the other side, in our parade of artisans, we see behind Kirchmayer is the sort of next level down in wood carving, which is the Cabinetmaker. So not only think of kitchen cabinets, but think of cabinet makers being the people who are making your wooden chairs, your wooden chest. Even in the early sort of 18th century history, the cabinet maker or the joiner would have been the people who were building the wooden frame of your house. And so if Kirchmayer is the wood carver doing decorative elements, the cabinet maker or the joiner is the one who's doing the sort of labor of construction. And so he is holding in his hand a wood plane, which if you came to my Wood and Trees event with the Winterthur wood scholar Greg Landry, you know that we wood planed here in the library. And so this wood plane that he's holding in both hands, he is sliding it across the wooden tree. And imagine you have this block of wood with a handle on both ends, and coming out of the bottom here is a blade. So think of almost like a box cutter or a very sharp blade that is coming out at an angle. And when you run it across the tree here, you're shaving off pieces of wood until you get down to a very flat surface. And so we can see the evidence of the wood carver on this beautiful quarter sawn oak here. If I can get the camera to pick it up, you're going to have all of these sort of little fleck marks, which are the marks of a wood plane planing away this piece. So before sandpaper, you would use planes of increasingly small blade size in order to get a flat piece of wood. So sandpaper is a relatively modern way of getting a flat piece of wood. Instead, this joiner or cabinet maker is planing down the tree to get a flat block. Behind him is our glass blower, who is using his pipe and then his molten blob of glass in order to shape some sort of vessel. Behind the glass blower is the weaver, who is holding her work of embroidery. Behind the weaver is the ceramic artist who is holding a vessel. And then lastly, we see the jeweler, who's sometimes described as the purse, but is, in my telling of the story and in most of the recorded documentation, he is listed as a jeweler. And so he has the decorative box in his hand. I think what makes some scholars say he's the purse, or the sort of financier, is the chain with the key there. And so is this a box of sort of coins, or is the box the art craft? I view him as a jeweler. And then around the piece, so if you have questions, be sure to type them in. Around the piece, remember Kirchmayer was a devout Lutheran, and so most of his work is ecclesiastical. George and Ellen Booth were deeply religious, and so we see different saints depicted all around the room, the scene. And so here's St. George and the dragon being slayed. Up above, I don't know if my dad is watching or someone else who is a scholar of saints, if you can identify these as we go past them. St. George and the dragon is the only one that I know, but we see 6 saints on either side of the piece. Now, next coming down, we see 3 letters, an A here. Behind the mantle clock, the French mantle clock, we see a B. And then at the other end, there is a C. And these A, B, Cs were meant to be tributes to George Booth's role as a newspaper publisher. And so the B in the middle could represent the Booths, but taken together, they're sort of letters, typesetting, A, B, C, the sort of fundamental aspect of newspapers and writing reflected here. And then the last feature of the overmantel are these Crusaders who are coming back. And so we have on one side, we have the Christians, on the other side, the Muslims, and they are at peace. And so they are walking away from each other. And so the Crusaders and the Saracens are marching back, and George Booth is depicting them at peace at this confluence where the Muslim world and the Christian world are beginning to trade and beginning to influence each other's arts. It's kind of amazing in just this, it's pretty small compared to my hand, the dimension that Kirchmayer is able to achieve between the knights, their horses, their banners, and then the way that he always brings it back to these sort of floral ornaments, and the way that the frame isn't just holding these figures, but the frame is becoming this sort of scroll work, this flourish of a leaf, and then that is transforming into the horse behind it. And so it's not a static composition. It's not just a frame with these figures. It really is tied into the design and construction. And here you can see the sort of Crusaders going all the way back to nothing, which gives it the depth. And then on this side we have the other side of the Crusaders, the Muslim side, going back with their curved swords and their turbans and their pantaloons and their horses. And then I love this jolly guy here who has the crescent moon on his turban, just to make sure we know who everyone is. And then again, ending with this botanical flourish. And so you have the figurative decoration meeting the botanic ornament, all set within the quarter-sawn oak frame. So the panels are from heating, or the cracks that are running across are from the wood expanding and contracting. And that's something that an expert like Kirchmayer would have planned for. They are visible back in the original photographs of the piece. They've become wider over time. And so the wood is actually expanding every time with humidity and with other sort of environmental changes. Of course, this room is heated, but it's not air conditioned, and the humidity isn't controlled at all. And so all of this wood is free floating, so it's not nailed to the wall at all. It is actually just paneled in. So imagine how you would clip together a floating wood floor. Most wood floors are floating. This is sort of clipped into the wall, and so it's expanding and contracting, and the cracks have become more visible over time. Now, the patina is an interesting question because, of course, the earliest photos are in black and white, And what's striking about those photos is how shock white the overmantel looks compared to the wall paneling. So the whole room has been restored and refinished a few times, but I'm not sure the overmantel ever has been. And I can't figure out, in looking at the black and white photography, exactly why there's such a huge contrast. If it is the photographer who is actually dodging or burning different parts to create an effect, or if it truly was radically different colors between Kirchmeyer's own hand and the overmantel, which was, of course, enormously more expensive, more attention paid to than the wood paneling. So is the difference of the master in the workshop, or is it the difference of an intentional difference in colors? George Booth was actually very unhappy with the rest of the wood carving in the room. He found all of these details to be far too shallow, and he actually even threatens to simply not allow Kirchmayer to do the commission for the oak room if he doesn't come back with better carving, better wood carving. And I think what George Booth was frustrated with were things like these Zodiac panels here, where you can see that there really is not much depth to the piece. And so it begins to look almost like mechanical wood carving, because even by 1918, there were machines that could crank out decorative wood carvings. And so if he is going to the expense of hiring a studio to hand carve every element, he wants it to look hand carved. That's the sort of great aesthetic choice of the arts and crafts movement, is the silversmith could make a perfectly smooth vessel, but so can a machine. A machine can't make a rough hammered looking vessel. So even though a rough hammered vessel would have historically been less desirable, you want to actually show the hand carving. And so George Booth found the studio's work to be very disappointing and too flat. And so Kirchmeyer's work has this real sort of depth and richness to it. I don't know if anyone else has any other questions about this overmantel. It is kind of, it's amazing just how George Booth creates this scene, the personification of the arts, and I neglected to mention that it is George Booth's idea here. So we're looking at Kirchmeyer's execution of George Booth's idea. We have in archives a sketch by Booth that shows how he wants to have the frame of saints, the Crusades across the bottom, the line there, and then George Booth draws about half of the figures, and he really lays out how he wants the artist to be. He chooses the artist, and then it's Kirchmayer who carves directly into the wooden block and sort of forms the final piece. But this is a George Booth design, and he is very pleased with it. Pleased enough that he actually makes the book plate for his library an image of the overmantel. And so you see here how the photographer has combined different pieces from the overmantel using cut and paste, not on the computer in Photoshop, but I'm sure literally cutting and pasting photographs. And so you have Kirchmayer, the bishop, Albert Kahn, the nun, and Arthur Stone surrounded by the 6 saints, the 2 shields from the top of the overmantel, and then the addition of the words, a book from the library at Cranbrook, George G. Booth. And you'll actually find some of these book plates at the Detroit Public Library, and you'll find many of them over at Cranbrook Academy of Arts Library, because George Booth in the 1940s did give away a lot of the most significant books from this library. So these are the sort of second and third important books that he didn't think would be valuable to scholars and researchers at either of the other libraries. Now, if anyone has any other questions while I'm standing here in the library, let me know. But I thought that I would end the tour, the Live at 5 today, by showing you one other piece of Kirchmeyer's work. When I came into the house, the sun was still out, and so just know that I'm here, and we'll hope there are no hauntings happening as I turn on the lights here. And we come over to one of these cabinets, and we'll see a second visage of Mr. Kirk. or Mr. Kirchmeyer. And so this is another portrait of the wood carver Johannes Kirchmeyer. Here is sort of standalone wooden figure. And this is the example where Kirchmeyer would start with the block of oak, mahogany, boxwood, or cherry, and he would sketch on each side of the block both the anatomical form of himself, then he would sketch in color the drapery, and then he would just start carving, and he would sort of find the figure within the wooden block. I mean, what a great portrait to have. There is one more portrait of Kirchmeyer here in the Doubting Thomas door at Christ Church, Cranbrook. You'll also see a portrait of Johannes Kirchmeyer carved by himself, alongside portraits of this Arthur Stone and Frank Koralewsky and Nicola De Santizo. All make repeat appearances from the Overmantel a decade later on the Doubting Thomas door. And Kirchmeyer did carve certain pieces like this chest here. And Kirchmeyer also did carvings for George Booth's own reading table. So there is a pretty high volume of Kirchmeyer's work at Cranbrook. He was enormously prolific, and so there are pieces of his all across the country. Here at Cranbrook, we have pieces at Christ Church, here in Cranbrook House, and then also at Brookside School in the Meeting House. He carved the 4 saints that are on the edges of the Meeting House room there. Okay, well, thanks so much for joining this live at 5. I forgot my watch, so I have no idea what time it is. But I think we got through everything I wanted to cover. Next week, I'm going to be coming to you live from a very special studio space, if I can get permissions lined up. So stay tuned for that. I'm busy planning out the next weeks of Live at 5s, and so I'm going to be hitting new spots and new corners of campus. If you have a building, if you have a work of art that you want to know more about, do send us an email at center@cranbrook.edu or send us a Facebook message so I can try and weasel my way into these different spots. Know that coming up at the end of this month, starting on January 25th, I'll be starting to teach my History of American Architecture lecture series. This year's series will go from 1932 until 2020, and we'll be talking about architects who have visited Cranbrook's campus and how they interacted with the Cranbrook architectural scene and how they sort of represent this microcosm of American architecture over time. You can sign up for that at center.cranbrook.edu. Thanks so much for watching. I hope that the next time you're in Cranbrook House, you'll be able to come and really study this remarkable work of art up close, and that we can all sort of seek the sort of beauty and the sort of joyous festival of the arts and crafts that George Booth seemed to live in when he created this really remarkable self-referential carving here at Cranbrook House. Because, as the Overmantel said, nature I loved, and next to nature, art. Thanks so much, everyone. See you next Wednesday for another Live at 5.